MDU requested a separate rate increase in the fall of 2008 with no mention of the YGen 3 investment at that time. Apparently, the decision to purchase a 25% share in the YGen 3 plant in April of 2009 was made in a relatively short time. It also seems likely that the current economic slump forced Black Hills Power to seek outside investment to offset reduced load forecasts. What alternatives to YGen 3 did MDU consider in depth? Have those alternatives been documented with the PSC? For example, did MDU seek bids for wind energy to supplement its gas-fired peak power generation? Displacing natural gas with wind has proven to reduce the risk of fuel price uncertainty. Other utilities in the area, including Pacific Corp, Black Hills Power themselves, and Basin Electric, have integrated wind into their supply portfolio. Second point I'd like to make is the new coal-fired power plant built in the last 30 years have averaged well over 500 megawatts per boiler, with many plants comprised of multiple boilers. A 100 megawatt, or in this case 110 megawatt, standalone plant incurs negative economies of scale, with higher construction and maintenance costs per installed kilowatt of capacity. In building 4 such plants over the last 15 years, Black Hills Power's business strategy has been to absorb those higher costs in exchange for the reduced market risk afforded by incremental expansion. By purchasing a share of YGen 3, MDU has effectively paid part of BHP's risk premium and would pass that premium on to its Sheridan customers rather than to its shareholders. When it became part owner of YGen 3, MDU forfeited future opportunities to select the least cost source of electricity. For the 25 megawatts of power under consideration, MDU has lost the flexibility of competitive bidding for supply contracts. As a minority, non-operating partner in YGen 3, it is at the mercy of one supplier of this power. Fourth, MDU took on the regulatory risk inherent to coal-fired power plants. Although the fuel supply for YGen 3 is secure, most experts agree that trading or taxing carbon emissions will disproportionately increase the cost of coal-fired generation. If this scenario holds true, the same rationale underlying the current request for rate relief will lead to more such requests in the future. And lastly, part of the proposed rate increase would fund MDU's request for a higher rate of return to its shareholders. The economic downturn has lowered the cost of equity capital, a function of prevailing interest rates and perceived risk, in comparison to historical levels. MDU's appeal for higher returns is inconsistent with this trend, especially in light of a simultaneous appeal for what amounts to lower risk.
And in regards to the rate hike being requested by MDU, it is my opinion that asking the ratepayer to pay for MDU's portion of the power plant that they have already purchased is outside the normal mode of operating a business. I believe that MDU's current rate structure already includes money to repair or replace, if not their equipment, then the equipment from whomever they are currently purchasing their power. I feel that it is the responsibility of the company to look to the future and be ready to replace aging equipment at the company's expense. This request for more money sounds like corporate greed and MDU trying to double dip and gouge the ratepayer. I understand the need to raise rates to cover a company's costs for inflation and think that MDU should not be allowed to request a rate increase for more than that amount. This huge increase in electrical rates will put an undue burden on our city and county governments as the state of Wyoming, because of the recession, is cutting the amount of money our local governments receive. It is advertised that the rate will be around 21%. But when you factor in the increase to the residential customer for the higher prices for goods and services, education, and city and county governments The rate is closer to 30%.
First, my understanding is the Commission should consider the economic reality that's facing a community in light of any proposed increase. And the reality in Sheridan is the unemployment rate has more than doubled over the last year alone. There's been reductions in workforce all across the Sheridan community. We've seen our tax revenues slide. We've seen reductions in property values. We're looking at possible reduced city services at an absolute critical time. And our general fund in less than 2 years has gone from approximately $14 million to $11 million projected in 2010. The general fund is what pays for police, fire, building inspection, the treasurer's office, clerk's office, and all of our streets. It's a 20% decline just in 2 years. And for those of you here old enough to remember the 80s and the last time we went through this kind of downturn, this is just the beginning. It's our estimate that rate increase is going to cost the city of Sheridan around an additional $180,000 a year, money that we will not be able to make up from any other source except reduced services. It would be my suggestion that you seriously take a look at the same kind of rate increase that our senior citizens are obtaining in their Social Security checks.
On page 4 of J. Stephen Gaske's testimony to you, he presented a chart, which I've included as Exhibit 1, outlining MDU's requested rate of return. In the chart, Mr. Gaske shows that the cost of preferred stock is 4.594%. At a meeting in Sheridan on January 14th, sponsored by the Sheridan County Chamber of County Commissioners, I asked one of MDU's representatives, Rita Mulkern, if the cost of preferred stock was 4.594%, why didn't they fund at least part of the YGEN 3 acquisition with preferred stock costing 4.594% rather than the more expensive 12.75% common equity? Ms. Mulkern responded by telling me that I obviously needed a lesson in Economics 101, which she would then give me. Just as an aside, I would note that like Mr. Gaske, I too got my degree from the University of Virginia, and in fact mine was in economics, although I'm not sure what Mr. Gaske's area of study was. So let's get back to the issue at hand. Ms. Mulkern then pointed out that this preferred stock had been issued in the 1950s, and preferred stock is seldom used today. I would point out that the chart was MDU's and not mine. If preferred stock was irrelevant, then why was it included in the presentation? I would suggest that this chart is similar to the con artist sleight of hand, which is designed to get us to take our eyes off the real location of the P. What's the P? The P is the 12.75% requested rate of return on common equity. It's clearly in MDU's best interest to use their legacy cost of preferred stock to be able to present the request as a 9.62% cost of capital rather than more simply say what they really want, which is a rate increase so they can get a rate of return of 12.75% on the common equity. So let's strip away some of the unnecessary complexity of MDU's request and simply ask whether or not a 12.75% rate of return on common equity is reasonable. With all due respect, I would suggest a 12.75% rate of return is reasonable only if you feel MDU should be in the running to displace Goldman Sachs as the reigning poster child of corporate greed and arrogance.